Hi and welcome in this new video, and I'm super excited because this is it. Airflow 3.0 is out, and in that video, you will discover everything you need to know about it. My name is Mark Lamarty, Head of Customer Education at Astronomer, best-selling instructor on Udemy, and if you don't want to miss anything about Airflow, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. That will help me a lot, and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Let's begin with the new Airflow UI, and as you can see, it is completely different than the previous one. And that's for a good reason, as it has been rebuilt using React from the ground up. Now let me tell you more about the new home. As you can see at the top, you have the health of your Airflow components, such as the meta database, the scheduler, trigger, and so on. Then just below you have the links. If you want to quickly access the failed DAGs, running DAGs, or active DAGs, you can do that. And more importantly, you can monitor your DAG runs and task instances at a glance with some very useful metrics corresponding to the different states that a DAG run and a task can have. On the right, you have the asset events that you will discover later in that video. Moving on to the new DAGs view, you can pick how you want to display your DAGs. So if you want to use tiles or if you want to use a list, this is up to you. But if you go back to the tiles, you can access a specific DAG run just by clicking on one of the bars here. The higher the bar is, the longer it took to complete a specific DAG run, and you can also see the state right away. So I love that new feature. In addition, you can sort your DAGs by display name, next DAG run, latest run state, and so on. You can look for a specific DAG by using the search bar right here, and then you can access DAG runs by clicking on that tab. You have the list of your DAG runs. You can filter by states as well as run types. And if you carefully take a look, you have a run type backfill that you will discover in a second. And next to the runs, you have the task instances. The list of task instances, you can search for a specific task, and you can filter by states as well. Maybe some of you already noticed, but you have a new column, which is the DAG version that we will see in a few minutes. And you can also know which operator is used by which task, as well as the duration it took to complete a given task. Now back to the DAGs view. If you click on a DAG, you will land on that page. On the left, you have the grid view by default. You can see how many DAG runs you got so far, along with their task instances. You can clearly see the states of the DAG runs and the tasks. And then you can choose how many DAG runs you want to display here, 10 by default, but you can go higher than that. On the right, you have some overall information regarding your DAG, such as the latest run, as well as the state of that one, the owner of the DAG, and the latest DAG version. Also, you can reparse the DAG, so if you modify it, you don't have to wait. Then for the last 24 hours by default, but you can pick a different time frame if you want, you can see how many tasks failed, as well as how many DAG runs failed. Just below, you have the last 3 DAG runs to get some metrics regarding the duration of each one, how long it took to complete a given DAG run, as well as how long it was in the queued state. Then, and this is one of the features that I love the most, you have the recent failed task logs, which means you can access the logs of the tasks in failure right away without having to click on the task. So you will save time. And if you want to see the full logs, you can do that by clicking here. Or you can even restart the task by clicking on that button. Next to the overview, you have the DAG runs, so the list of the DAG runs. You already saw that in the DAGs view, but you also have the tasks, which is interesting because now you get the list of the tasks like in the DAGs view, but you can see that for each task, the operator used, the trigger rule used, the last instance with the state, and each bar here corresponds to a task instance of that task. Again, the higher the bar is, the longer it took to complete that task, and you can see the state for each one. Then you have the events corresponding to some events regarding your DAG, the code of your DAG, and details. Let's go back to the runs. If you pick a DAG run, you can add a note to explain why this DAG run failed, which might be useful for your teammates. And also, if you pick a task, then now you have the logs, as you can see here, which I think are easier to read than before. You can filter by sources as well as by log levels. And then if you want to add a note to that task, you can do that as well. Next, if you want to restart the task, you click on that button. And again, you have some information regarding the task. Going back to the grid view, you have access to the graph view. So if you want to see the dependencies between your tasks, you can do that, and you have access to some very interesting options, such as the DAG version that you want to display here. Again, I will come back at that later, the DAG run, the dependencies, and the graph direction. Last but not least, if you want to trigger your DAG, you click on trigger, and here you have advanced options. You can pass a logical date, a run ID. Usually you won't pass a run ID, but you can do it if you want, some parameters, and DAG run notes, and then you click trigger. We will see the assets view later, which is a new way to write your DAGs. The pools view is a little bit different. You can search for a specific pool, you can sort your pools, and more importantly, you will see the states of the tasks that are running for a given pool. That being said, the last thing that I would like to show you is that in the user panel, you can switch to light mode if you want, but I prefer dark mode. It is up to you. Also, you can change the default view that you land on when you click on a DAG. If you want to default to graph view, you can do that. And then in the docs, you have access to the REST API reference. Keep in mind that now Airflow is using FastAPI and you have access to all the endpoints located under /API v2. Speaking of the API, I highly recommend you to look at the endpoints you have access to, because now you have more entities that you can manipulate through the API than before. For example, you can manipulate your assets, but you can also backfill your DAGs using the API. You can push XComs as well, and you can access user permissions and so on. The last small but nice improvement that I would like to show you on the Airflow UI is that if you have a DAG with docmd, so some documentation, then you have a dedicated button for that. You click on DAG docs and then you can see the documentation of your DAG. So that's it for the UI. I hope you enjoy it, but now it's time to move to the next new feature. That new feature is the assets, which is a completely different way of writing your DAGs. Let me show you that. Imagine that you have the following two data pipelines, daily report and monthly report. Both use the task-free API with the DAG and task decorators, and they produce two datasets, daily sales and monthly sales. Now, do you truly care about the DAG and the tasks? Not that much. Actually, what you care about is more on the datasets that they produce, daily sales and monthly sales. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the new asset syntax allows you to focus on. The assets. So on the right, you can see the exact same equivalent to DAGs using the asset syntax. At the top, you have the daily report, and at the bottom, you have the monthly sales. The new asset syntax allows you to focus on your assets, removing all the boilerplate code that you usually have to make to create a DAG and tasks. Now, what is an asset? An asset is a collection of logically related data, and if that rings a bell to you, that's because before it was named datasets. Also, behind the scene, an asset is a DAG with a single task and defined as a function. That means you can pass and use most of the parameters that a DAG has. Also, an asset can have a name, an URI corresponding to the path of the underlying data that this asset represents, a group, and possibly extra information. In addition, a function can return multiple assets, an asset can reference another asset, and an asset can also have a watcher, as you will see later in that video, to create truly event-driven data pipelines. Looking at the following example, you have the user asset that returns a fake user. You can see that the asset is produced every day at midnight. It has the following URI and two DAG parameters, the description and the tags. Then under the user asset, you have the user location asset, which is scheduled on the user asset. So as soon as the user asset materializes, that triggers the user location asset. And then we are fetching the user that the user asset returns in order to extract the location from the user. In addition, you can see that we are accessing the context. And if you used to access the context of your tasks, you know that the context is not that clear, right? You don't exactly know what you have access to, but now it's over as you have the context type. And if you take a look at that, you can see exactly what you have access in the context of your task. So I highly recommend you to always use the context type for the context of your task. On the Airflow UI, you have the assets view where you can get the list of your assets. For example, here, user location and user, and you can search for a specific asset using the search bar. Then you can quickly see for a given asset which group it belongs to, which DAG is consuming it, and which task produces that asset. You can also trigger an asset, and that means you can either materialize the asset or manually create an asset event. Materializing an asset means that you trigger the upstream DAG that materializes that asset, so you actually execute the logic behind that asset, whereas for the manual, you create just an asset event corresponding to that asset. That can be nice to test some downstream dependencies of that asset without executing the logic behind it. If you want, you can pass some extra information as well that you will be able to get from your asset, and then you create the event. In addition to that view, if you click on a given asset, you land on that page, which is like the graph view for your DAGs. This view is perfect to see the dependencies between your assets. For example, here you know that as soon as you materialize the user asset, that materializes the user location asset. Also, you can see the upstream DAGs that produce your assets, for example, here user and user location, and that's why you have the toggles right there. That's because they are the DAGs that materialize the assets. On the right, you can see for a given asset some information, and just below the asset events related to that asset. So here, each time that asset has been materialized. Last but not least, you can return multiple assets from a function by using the asset multi decorator. And then in the outlets parameter, you define the assets that you want to materialize. For example, here we are materializing user location and username, and that's why here we are returning two values, one for the location and one for the name. If you were using datasets before, I highly recommend you to use assets because datasets are deprecated. Keep in mind that most of the features that you had with datasets, you have them as well with assets. Now, let's move on to the next feature. In Airflow 3.0, now you can backfill your DAGs not only using the CLI like it was before, but through the UI and the API. So let me show you how to do it on the UI. As you can see here, I have a DAG, my DAG, that I'm backfilling right now. You can see backfill in progress. And to do that, you just need to click on Run Backfill. If you click on that button, you land on that page. That gives you a date range for which you want to backfill your DAG. Then the behavior that you want to apply for that backfill, if you want to run missing runs only or missing and errored runs or even all runs, then you can decide to run backwards, so from the most recent to the oldest date, then the number of active runs, and then you just click on Run Backfill. That will run the process, as you can see here, and you will see the following icon on the DAG runs to indicate that those DAG runs were triggered using the backfill mechanism. In addition, you have a new tab, Backfills, so you can see the backfills that you've done so far. For example, here, you know that this one was done from this date to this date, the behavior, the created ad, completed ad, the duration of the backfill, and how many active runs you had to backfill your DAG. Also, remember that if you go back to the DAGs and then go to the runs, you can see here for the run types, the backfill. So if you want to know which DAG runs have been backfilled, then you just click on backfill and then you will see those two DAG runs with the backfill type. If you don't want to use the UI to backfill your DAGs, well, guess what? You have the following REST API endpoints to backfill them as well. So finally, backfilling your DAGs will be a pleasure. I mean, I don't know if it will be a pleasure, but that will be much better than before. And I will add that now backfilling jobs are much more reliable than before because they are part of the scheduler. So now let's move on to the next feature. I'm sure you're gonna love that one, DAG Bundles. So let's go back to how it was before Airflow 3.0. Remember that Airflow always executed tasks using the latest DAG code, so you didn't get DAG versioning basically. Also, Airflow was continuously parsing DAG files. That means long wait for updates or waste of resources. In addition, all of your DAGs were in a single location, the DAGs folder, which encouraged bad practices, with the DAG folder having everything in it. But with DAG bundles, this is over. A DAG bundle is a collection of DAGs and other files that support DAG versioning. They allow tasks to run using a specific version of DAG code, they allow more control over Airflow parsing behavior, and also your DAGs can come from many different sources. Let me show you an example. Let's say you have a Git repo with your DAGs in it. Here you configure your Git connection, and then you can configure a DAG bundle for your Git repo. A DAG bundle has at least 3 parameters: the name of the bundle, you choose whatever you want here, the type of that bundle, here it is the Git DAG bundle, and then you have some specific parameters according to the type of bundle you use. For example, here the Git connection ID or the tracking ref. In addition, you can specify a refresh interval for a bundle, which means Airflow will synchronize the DAGs in that source every 5 seconds in that example. Now you can have more than one sources for your DAGs. Let's say you also have a local file system that you want to use. You just need to do that. And now you have access to your DAGs from a local DAGs folder as well as a Git repository. And you can have more than one Git repositories if you want as well. This is a super powerful feature which is linked to another one, DAG versioning. Just to give you some pain points that you had without DAG versioning, Airflow assumes the last DAG code applies to all past runs. Code updates during a run can cause tasks to execute different code versions, and DAG changes overwrite history, making past executions hard to trace. Just to give you an example, let's say you add a new task to your DAG and then you run it, you can see the execution of welcome, but then you reduce back to 2 tasks, and now you lost the trace of the execution of the welcome task. And even worse, if you completely change your DAG and add new tasks, then now you don't even know what happened in those 2 DAG runs, but still you see that they were successful. Very weird. With DAG versioning, this is over. If you go on the Airflow UI and pick a DAG, you can see in the options that you have different versions of that DAG. If we go to the V1, then we can see 2 tasks, task A and task B. But then if we go to V2, we can see that we had 3 tasks, task A, C, and B. And then if we look at v3, we can see that we are back to task A and B. It is very easy to go to a previous version of your DAG to know its structure at the time it was executed. In addition, you can see here the latest DAG version of your DAG. And then if you look at the runs, keep in mind that you can see for each run on which version it was executed. For example, that DAG run was executed on v3, then this one on v2, and the last one on v1. Same thing for the task instances. If you look at the task instances, you will see the version on which they were executed. Also, if you go to the code, you can see the code of your DAG according to the version. So for example, if we go back to v1, you can see that we had two tasks, task A and task B. Then if we look at v2, you can see the three tasks, which are task A, C, and B, and so on. So I just love that feature. Now there are just a few things you need to know. The first one is you get a new version of your DAG if you run it. So let's say you have your DAG, you add a new task, and then you don't run it, you add another task, you still don't run it, you don't get a new version of your DAG. But if you have your DAG, you add a new task, you run it, you get a new version. If you add a new task again, you run it, you get a new version of your DAG. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you make modifications but you don't run your DAG, you will never get a new version of your DAG. Then DAG versioning is not yet accessible from the grid view. So here, if you look at the options, you cannot see the DAG versions of your DAG runs right here. I think that will come in the next Airflow release. Also, if you want to run a task on a previous DAG version, then you need to have a DAG bundle that supports versioning. And finally, you have access to 2 endpoints in the Airflow REST API related to DAG versioning. So now you know about DAG versioning, I would like to show you another very nice feature in Airflow 3.0. That new feature is the external event-driven scheduling, meaning finally you can trigger your data pipelines based on external events. Thanks to the introduction to the asset watchers. An asset watcher continuously checks whether a message queue has received any new messages. So as you can guess, you will need a message queue, and this process is done asynchronously. Let me show you an example. Let's say you have your message queue, an external tool, whatever you want, and then your Airflow environment with the asset and a DAG. The asset with the asset watcher continuously watches the queue for any new messages. Then you have your external tool that sends an event to that queue, a message. The asset watcher detects the new message, and that triggers the data pipeline that depends on the asset. Concretely, the first step is to import message queue trigger. Then you create a trigger with your queue in it. So you have to create a queue first. And for now, only AWS SQS is supported. You can expect more message queue systems in the future. Once you have the trigger, the next step is to create an asset and define the watcher's parameter with an asset watcher object. In that asset watcher, you put the trigger that you created before, then you schedule your DAG on that asset, and finally, you can read the events from the queue using that code. So that's how you can truly create event-driven scheduled data pipelines. Speaking of DAG scheduling, there is a major update. Let's say you have a DAG with a start date on January 1st, 2025 that runs every day at midnight. On January 1st, 2025, nothing happens yet. It is on January 2nd, 2025 that the first DAG run runs for the data interval between January 1st and January 2nd. Then Airflow waits for the scheduled interval, and it is on January 3rd that the second DAG run runs for the data interval between January 2nd and January 3rd. Since the beginning of Airflow, that was the behavior by default, but with 3.0, it is not anymore. Indeed, now you won't have this wait anymore, right? Where you have Airflow that waits for the scheduled interval before triggering your DAG. Now your DAG runs right away when you expect it to run. Concretely, it means that if you have a DAG with the start date on January 1st, 2025, then your DAG runs on January 1st, 2025. And then for the second DAG run, it runs on January 2nd, 2025. And that means the data interval start, data interval end, and logical date have the exact same date. So for example, in the DAG run 1, you will get January 1st, 2025 for the data interval start and the data interval end. So you can use the logical date directly. And same thing for the DAG run 2, you will get January 2nd, 2025, and that will be the value for the data interval start and the data interval end, so you can use the logical date here. So just keep that in mind. If you are relying on data intervals, then you might have some breaking changes here. If you want to go back to the previous behavior, then you just need to modify the two following Airflow settings and set them to true. Another major update in Airflow 3.0, if not the biggest one actually, is the new architecture. Remember that since Airflow 2.0, you had this architecture where all the Airflow components had direct access to the Airflow meta database, and that had many implications. The first one is security risks. All tasks have access to the Airflow database, and as you can imagine, this is not great as you are executing user-defined code. Also, no separate component upgrades. You weren't able to upgrade your workers independently from the other components. Limited scalability because of the many concurrent connections that you had to make to the Airflow database. Most of the time, you had to use pgbouncer for that. And last but not least, remote execution of tasks was extremely hard. But this is over thanks to the new architecture in 3.0, which is the following one. So now you have a new component, which is the API server. And the API server serves three purposes. The first one is the user interface. Without the API server, you don't have access to the Airflow user interface. The second one is it provides an interface for your workers, and so your tasks, to interact with the rest of your Airflow components. And finally, the third one, it provides the public Airflow REST API that you can interact with. In addition, the DAG file processor that it is responsible for retrieving and parsing your DAG file runs as a standalone Airflow component. You will see it when you run Airflow. This new architecture brings some major improvements. The first one is tasks do not directly reach the Airflow database. So again, that is better for scalability and security reasons. Also, components can be upgraded separately. Finally, you can upgrade your workers separately from the other Airflow components, which allows you more flexibility. You can also execute tasks in remote trusted networks, as you will see in a second. Then last but not least, you can potentially run tasks in any languages. For now, it is only Golang, and this is experimental, but if you are interested by that, wait a little bit for the future Airflow releases, or more languages will be supported. Back to the executing tasks in remote trusted networks, this is possible with the new EdgeExecutor. So the way it works with the EdgeExecutor is that you have your main cluster with your Airflow components as well as some workers, why not? But what you can do now with the EdgeExecutor is to run your tasks anywhere you want in a remote trusted location. For example, here in a remote cluster with local workers. And this is possible with the API server that separates your Airflow main components from your workers where tasks run. Alright, finally there is one last feature that I would like to touch on, which is a new timetable. And that new timetable allows you to have multiple schedules, cron expressions for your data pipelines. Here you just need to import the multiple cron trigger timetable, you use it for the schedule of your DAG, and then you define your cron expressions just like that. You are able to trigger your DAG at different schedules. So that's it about Airflow 3.0. As you can see, a lot of new features, a lot of major updates. I'm super excited about this one. Please give any feedback that you have. That's how we make. And more importantly, I would like to thank all of the committers, PMC members, and anyone who has worked on Airflow 3.0. This is amazing. I love that project. The community is huge and amazing. So thank you so much again for everything. And I see you for another video. Just let me know in the comment below if you want to know anything in particular about Airflow 3. And that was a pleasure for me. Take care. Peace.